So we've been talking a lot about Twitter today, and I am going to really try to limit this video to a couple things. First of all, promoting a couple other alt tech ideas that I want you to at least take a look at. Second of all, to look at what is the long-term outlook of Twitter. Why is it that they may be actually pretty vulnerable to a real collapse, not just in terms of stock price, but also who is really going to keep wanting to use Twitter after we've seen the type of behavior that is the bread and butter of its user base. So before we keep going, I want you to like the video, I want you to subscribe, and I want you to subscribe also to my newsletter, which is the first link in the description below. And also you can subscribe to me on all of the other platforms. If you are into BitChute, you can find me on BitChute. Been gaining a few subscribers here and there lately, especially on there. I love BitChute. This is Odyssey. If you're on Odyssey, go ahead and look me up. I am called Bold Like a Leopard or Razor Ray McCoy. I have two different channels on there. So this is Alice Cristoforo. You might know him from the Duran if you're a fan of that news channel. You can also find me on Rumble. Rumble is not particularly user-friendly in my opinion, but I am using it as a channel and will be reviewing it along with all the others. Now, there are two other things I want you to consider first today. So, Brave, if you want a different experience browsing on the internet, you should try Brave. It is more private than YouTube. Of course, you might want to get things like a VPN. You might want to do other things like install ad blocker on your browser. It's all up to you. But I would say that so far my experience on Brave, both on desktop as well as on mobile, has been superb. And for those of you that are former Reddit users, I would suggest looking into Ruckus, Ruqqus. I have just started using Ruckus, and no complaints yet, but there's not that many people on it. If you join, there will be at least one person more. And that's what I say about all of these platforms. Now, getting back to my newsletter, this is the first one that I published through Substack. This is my email, by the way, through the newsletter. So if you want to reach me to talk about things that relating to the newsletter, ask about certain ideas, just chat a little bit about some of the things that we talk about either on the channel or on the newsletter, that's where you can reach me, razorsharpreport at protonmail.com. And that's basically a good place to reach me. There's also a different email you can reach me that's in the description. That's also for more of the YouTube and video-based stuff, but it doesn't matter really. I check both of them all the time. In any case, so this is called When the Bluebird Tweets in Pain. And the main thrust of it is that there is a lot of catharsis right now, I would say on the left, from people who would say that the time has come that Donald Trump has to be amputated from Twitter. He's like a malignant tumor. He has to be surgically removed. Can't be allowed to stay on there because he's so toxic, so awful, that the platform itself can't stand to have him on it. And among the people who is saying that is, even if you know the investment, I don't know if you'd call them a blog or just a consultant website called the Motley Fool. They've said that Twitter doesn't need Trump. And the real issue here, so the author of this is Jeremy Bowman, and he's saying that despite the controversy and the sell-off, the move shouldn't affect this tech company's underlying business over the long term. In fact, it could even be a positive force for the company. And he says it's easy to see why investors would react poorly to the Trump ban. First, the president is a magnet for attention. 1 second. On the site with 88 million followers, Trump was one of the most followed users on the service. Trump also brought a level of attention to Twitter that no previous political leader had, using it as his own personal megaphone to communicate with the public. It made Twitter and Trump's account, Real Donald Trump, a must-follow source for much of the news media, Trump's own base, and anyone else politically inclined. Banning him has led to a backlash from his supporters and other corners of the conservative establishment who have attacked the site and promised to go elsewhere. Then he continues, but it's important to remember several facts here. First, Trump's influence and relevance is likely waning as he will soon no longer be president. That means his tweets will be far less newsworthy after January 20th inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. So I want you to imagine that. So if you go to at Joe Biden, this is something that people have to understand. Joe Biden is supposedly the president-elect. He is 24.3 million. He is the president-elect, but depending on whether you respect the result of the election, it might be a little bit of a sore topic. And in fact, I disagree with the result of the election. I believe it was not duly and lawfully carried out. But you can actually see that Joe Biden tweeted only about 10 minutes ago. There's only about 400 tweets relating to that tweet. You can see that there's 4.8 thousand tweets for another video of his. Like, people aren't really interested in him because he's a very uninteresting candidate. And that's one of the reasons people do not accept that this was a fair election. And yet you would go to the Donald Trump account and immediately his tweets would go viral because he was a person who knew how to market himself, irrespective of whether you agreed with him. And though he may continue to agitate about presidential issues, the media will likely not pay as much attention to his comments as he's become accustomed to. So that's an interesting observation. What he's alleging is that the media will decide, we're going to just ignore Donald Trump from now on. Well, a fat chance of that. The fact is that you had previous presidents, whether it was Obama. When Obama left office, there was constant following of him around, going to watch him, frolic around with Richard Branson and talking about how awesome Michelle Obama is and everything. The press doesn't stop following presidents when they leave office. I do know that when President Bush left office, it was a relatively quiet retirement for a very long time. But you see what happened with President Clinton. He started the Clinton Global Initiative. He did a lot of very newsworthy stuff after he became president. A lot of that stuff was, in my opinion, negative stuff, which we don't have time to go into today. And you might actually hear about if you look at some of my oldest videos. But in any case, and I think those videos are on YouTube anyway. So if you're watching on the other platforms, I'm sorry, but the old archived Clinton Library videos, I'm sorry, they're probably not on Odyssey or BitChute. They might be on BitChute, but who knows. In any case, the president, when he leaves office, remains a subject of conversation depending on what their popularity was when they were in office or how interested the media was in what they did. And while there are presidents that didn't really earn much attention when they left office, like President Bush Sr., President Bush Jr., I don't think really was followed that much after he left office. People wanted to forget about him. He was that bad. But I think with Donald Trump, you're going to see the exact opposite. You're going to see a lot of following of him because the news media needed him. They would constantly throw his name out as red meat. And unfortunately, I think it's a bad thing, but I am predicting it's going to happen because there's so much that's really newsworthy that doesn't get any attention. The wars in the Middle East, different shortages in other countries around the world, In South America, there is certainly political upheaval. People don't really talk about. Um, so then here it says, and while the risk of backlash is real and Twitter may lose some users permanently, ultimately the site really has no true competitor. Social media sites like Gab and Parler have emerged as right-wing stand-ins for Twitter, but there's no other site designed to disseminate opinions, information, and other comments with the breadth and depth offered by Twitter. So, in my opinion, he's not telling the truth. The fact is, Parler, I don't think was a great competitor, but it certainly was a worthy, it was a worthy stand-in, and it started to really catch fire before the insidious campaign to eliminate it, which was spearheaded by Twitter as well as other social media platforms and Amazon. And therefore, if they were such a threat to the long-term stability of the country, how come, they were looking at it for so many weeks and whatever, and yet suddenly at this moment there's this big convergence of forces in order to push them off because of supposedly Parler's role in the Capitol riot, which people are well aware it was not Parler that did it, and I'm not a big fan of Parler, its usability. I do have Parler, but it's really not that great of a site. As far as Gab, you would be surprised how functional it can be at times, including using such things as Gab TV, which I would say are not they're not first class, but they're getting better, and Gab is certainly starting to take off in terms of its membership. And yet Motley Fool isn't really following it because, like I said, these people have an interest in remaining on the establishment side of the social media conflict, right? It's easy if you already have a large following on Twitter and you depend on Twitter in order to get your material out, and you don't want to start building again because it takes a lot of hard work and you have to maybe organically build a following. That's one of the reasons that these people are disparaging Gab and Parler, right? And I understand it. It's very difficult to build a following, but I will not, suffer this nonsense where they say that Gab is not as functional as it is. Somewhat as functional as Twitter. It's getting more functional all the time, and it's had a lot more obstacles to go through. Though its function as a news source is one of its strengths, Twitter's users rely on the social media platform for much more than just getting news. Many follow specific quote channels within Twitter. For instance, investors on hashtag FinTwit use Twitter to dialogue with other investors to discuss stocks and trade investing tips. There are myriad other channels where Twitter users discuss specific topics of interest, whether they're professional, cultural, or entertainment related. So, he goes on, he says that the main reason he thinks that it could be a good idea is because it has nothing to do with ideology, it has nothing to do with whether Twitter is a healthy social media network for people. It has to do with the idea that maybe advertisers will now start to flock to Twitter or flock to Facebook. He also discusses Facebook somewhat in this, in order to, whereas before they wouldn't, because the reason that many advertisers were not willing to go on Twitter was because apparently, there would be harassment, there would be hate speech on Twitter, things like that. And I can tell you this, that if this is what that guy, I think his name is Jeremy Bowman, yes. So if that's what he's banking on, he is bound to be disappointed. It really is one of the most toxic social media platforms out there, Twitter. And I can tell you, as someone who used it for about 2 years before getting banned myself, that I gained so much back from not being on Twitter. And I've also gained a lot back from being mostly dormant on Facebook. You get to really you get to really appreciate a little bit more of your time doing other things, maybe exercising more, spending your time with people that are important to you, or doing literally anything else, right? Writing more articles in my case, maybe visiting places that you were only talking about visiting before. And I would say that that is really something that people have lost through social media as opposed to gaining. Now, I'm not going to generalize here. There's obviously people who, and you might be one yourself, that you're at home and you're saying to yourself, what's he talking about? I visit, these islands. I go to Greece or whatever. I go to, I go to some national park. I go to the store and I tweet, I tweet or I make a Facebook post about something I ate, whatever the case may be. And that's fine and dandy. If you're someone who feels that your Twitter and Facebook experience is positive, there you can hear that I still get messages on Facebook, but I don't really post that much. But if you're one of these people who feels that they can keep it positive, then I don't really care if you continue to be on Twitter or Facebook, because I don't think that you are. I think that you're personally probably able to keep your focus more on things that are beneficial to you than on the things that Twitter and Facebook are really there for, which are commercial promotion of basically, first of all, Facebook is blatantly just a platform that is using you in order to sell product. They're selling you to the vendors, right? Or they're selling you, I guess, and their customers are the companies that need your data in order to direct their products and services to you. Therefore, Facebook is the vendor, you're the product, and the companies that advertise on Facebook are the real customer, right? So if you're using Facebook less, you're effectively removing yourself as a product as much as possible. It's not entirely possible because once they've stored your data, they can continue to sell it, and you probably will get ads elsewhere. And this is something that's just a basic fact of life, unfortunately. In fact, they've even said that it's possible to have all of your data up on Facebook without ever having used it due to the different nexuses that you have to people around you that are on Facebook. So essentially, Facebook may have they may have data on every single person in the world, potentially. Now, the reason that these platforms got popular, in my opinion, especially Facebook, was that people wanted to reconnect with old friends. They wanted to talk about things that were key to their lives. And they wanted to sometimes, put together clubs, clubs for people who like, model that like putting together models, putting together, home improvement projects, cooking, things like that. It had very little to do with politics. At least the Facebook that I remember joining. I remember joining. I'd connect with some people that I knew. I would discover new bands and new ideas that I was hearing about, in terms of especially, career paths that are out there and technology. That was really the Facebook that I think was a great place to go. And the same thing with YouTube. I thought it was amazing that you had a place where you could type in music videos that you hadn't seen in decades, or instantly find songs that before you had to wait until it came up on the video feed. So just like YouTube evolved and it's no longer really that type of platform where it's used as a jukebox for people, it's not that much of a place anymore for music, although it can be. Twitter and Facebook are no longer places for people to really connect and have beneficial relationships. And that's why I'm not surprised that this Pew Research survey, which I linked in the article, it says 64% of Americans say social media have a mostly negative effect on the way things are going in the U.S. today. Think about that. You have 64% of American adults saying that it's mostly negative, overwhelmingly among Republicans. So 78% say negative. Uh, and even among Democrats, it's a majority. 53% say negative, compared to only 14% saying it's mostly positive. And even among younger crowds, okay, ages 18 through 29, it's very negative on the Republican side. And while on the Democrat side, the younger Democrats, it's 43% say it's mostly negative, 20% say it's mostly positive. So it's not as skewed. You have a consensus, in my mind, among Americans across the political spectrum that using social media habitually just isn't really healthy for the mind and the body. I think it's my experience like that. I've tried to change my personal consumption of social media a lot, and I've largely I've deleted the Facebook apps from my phone, or at least the messaging app. I think you can only deactivate the actual app, and those things free up a little bit more time. Obviously, I'm checking stuff from other social media platforms that I really do like Minds. I do try to check up on Gab, things like that. But it isn't as much of a waste. You're not arguing with tons of people anymore. And I would argue that it's less toxic than Facebook and Twitter. So I'm going to close today. This is a topic that you might have already heard about. And I know that I'm kind of burying it. It's not the lead, but I'm still going to talk about it a little. But this is an example of the toxic culture that Twitter has created, and it's backfired on the very people who have blamed Donald Trump for it. You see, there's a thing that's become a major topic in terms of regulating social media, and that's social media mobs. And then there are people, for example, this lady from 2013, Justine Sacco, who said that she's going to Africa. She said she hopes she isn't getting AIDS. Just kidding. She said, she said, and it was like it was a tasteless joke and everything. And she got basically unpersoned because because Twitter they hunted her down like a wild animal, and she was fired from her job, and that's become a very common thing right now. You have another thing that's happened. There are a dozen, if not hundreds, of examples of here, with some involving some more serious and violent issues like sexual assault. More recently, the New York Times made headlines again when it refused to fire tech journalist Sarah Jung after her past tweets about hating white people resurfaced. Some publications hailed this as the right move, indicating that these tweets had been weaponized against Jung by the alt-right. So what is really the issue here is that there's selective outrage over which tweets and which ideology is offensive. And notably, there have been cases where Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, has been told, you're basically literally through the way that you impose the rules, you're discriminating based on ideology. Because someone like Sarah Jeong, who was making tweets that were essentially depersoning anyone who's white, she not only has never had any consequences from this, she's become, she's risen in stature. She's joined the New York Times. I don't remember where she was before. She was maybe at Mashable. I don't remember. On the other hand, you have people, and I'm not a fan of hers either, but like Barry Weiss, who she was a journalist with the New York Times, and she was basically forced out of the New York Times, forced to resign due to harassment, both within the organization, through a lot of the internal messaging and collaboration platforms, as well as on Twitter. So she's basically been forced out, similar to Glenn Greenwald. And that's very odd, by the way, that you would have Glenn Greenwald, possibly one of the most, anti-war, one of the most famous anti-war figures of the past 20 years, and Barry Weiss, who is a major neoconservative. They're forced into the same camp by proxy. It's very strange, and I know that it's only to a certain extent, but the fact is that today, or it might have been yesterday, but in any case, this backfired already on one of the people who was saying, "Oh, it's Donald Trump who's toxic on Twitter. It's him." Once we get rid of him, we're gonna have a much more healthy platform. We're gonna heal America. We're gonna have a better society. We're gonna have unity. We're going to really restore decency. And what happened? The Lincoln Project co-founder resigns from the group, admits to inappropriate messages to multiple men. So what this is, if you haven't heard, I'm sure many of you have because you might already be in the same sphere as the people who are interested in this. But the Lincoln Project is a organization. It's an organization that was formed in the past couple of years in order to be a sounding board of and really just a political action committee that's formed by nominally Republican people who were active in the Republican Party prior to Donald Trump. In this case, John Weaver was an aide to Senator McCain, one of the biggest neoconservatives in American history. And by the way, he was also an activist for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee for a little while too, if you didn't know. So a guy who did play on both sides of the aisle, which he played for both teams, if and that's not by mistake, pun intended here, because this is a guy who eventually it arose that in the past, he had been making sexually explicit texts to other dudes who were younger men in the conservative movement. Somebody I know named Pedro Gonzalez, he was tweeting about this. I think he was saying that there's a lot of these guys who were coming forward and saying, "Yeah, I got texts from John Weaver. He was talking all the time, calling me all sorts of like pet names and things like that. That I'm, trying to get them to go out with him. Even in some cases, trying to trade sexual favors for career advancement." And that's what I would say is one of the first examples post Donald Trump, because remember, in 3 days, Donald Trump is kind of going to be fading away in terms of his real functional importance. What are they going to blame this on, right? So this guy had to officially leave the Lincoln Project because of sexual impropriety. And the Lincoln Project itself, why is it so vulnerable now that Twitter has booted Donald Trump? Because there's nobody really likes them, right? If you're a person who is a moderate Democrat, you don't think you need the Lincoln Project anymore, right? These are people who are basically crowding your section of the market. There's plenty of Democrats who already identify as Democrats who are saying, yeah, we are okay with foreign intervention, we are okay with fracking, we're okay with all sorts of other, unpopular policies among the progressive left. So that is something that they're crowding the market. They don't need the Lincoln Project anymore because the whole purpose of the Lincoln Project was to eliminate the Trump presidency as a threat to the establishment. And supposedly that's been accomplished, right? Although they seem to be very anxious that he be impeached and convicted so that once and for all he can never be president again, right? The other thing is that the people who really are the bread and butter of Twitter are not just the mainstream Democrats who could care less whether John Weaver has a career or not. Like, they don't need him anymore. They barely needed him at the time. The people who are the bread and butter of Twitter are the radical left activists, are the Antifa type, the BLM type, and they don't have any sympathy for him. They see him as just as disgusting and toxic as any of the actual Trump Republicans. The notion that you can be a Republican and be acceptable to people on the left today is one of the most delusional realities to live in. Like it's a parallel reality. It's almost like believing that you are the one gazelle that the lions won't touch. So with that, I think I'll conclude. And I want to thank you guys for listening to me. I want to remind you once again to subscribe to me on the Razor Sharp News Chronicle. It is in the description below. And also to find me on BitChute and Odyssey, as well as Rumble. And have a great day.